This is what a $60,000 Volkswagen electric SUV looks like. This is the ID.4, a model that we've been waiting for a long time in Australia. Better late than never, and it comes with a fairly sharp price, I have to say, strong levels of equipment and a lot of upgrades in a bit of a mid-cycle refresh for this electric medium-sized SUV. Now, it lands in a really competitive part of the segment. By my last count, you can choose between around 18 electric medium-sized SUVs in Australia at the moment. That's a lot. Does this have enough to cut through all of that noise? Is it a worthy option? Let's have a closer look. The Volkswagen ID.4 is coming to Australia in the high-spec Pro variant only for the time being in Australia, and this does get plenty of standard kit for that $59,990 plus on-road costs. There's matrix LED headlights here, 19-inch alloy wheels, and a panoramic glass roof with a sunshade and a 360-degree camera system. On the inside, you've got heated and massaging front seats with electric adjustment and memory for the driver. There's also a 12.9-inch infotainment display, 3-zone climate control, and interior ambient lighting. It's also worth mentioning that Volkswagen does include a trickle charger and a Type 2 cable as standard kit in the ID.4. That's something that you don't get elsewhere. Now, don't forget, if you're in the market for an SUV, a ute, diesel, hybrid, electric, it doesn't matter. Have a look at Drive Marketplace because we've got loads of cars for sale there right now. Here's the interior of the ID.4, and like I said earlier, there's Pro and there's GTX, but in terms of the interior layout, the treatment, the amount of spec you get, it stays fairly steady across the board, and I do like this interior overall. In terms of storage and space, you've got good amounts of room down here in this center console. There's 2 cup holders, there's a bit of a nook underneath there as well for storing things, a wireless charging pad, 2 USB-Cs, and then extra cup holders and storage here in the middle, which you can also close to keep that mess out of sight, which is really nice overall. Now, in terms of materials, this looks and feels pretty good. You've got a nice mixture of things here. This particular model has the different brown elements around the place as well, which I personally really like. And this interior does look and feel, it's not premium and luxury in that regard, but it feels really nicely done overall, in my opinion. Now, one thing I've always liked about Volkswagen vehicles in recent years is the seats. And in this case here, these seats are fantastic as well. You've got nice adjustment on offer, good bolstering. They just feel ergonomically really nice. And of course, you've got tilt and reach adjustment through the steering column. And because you've got this little display mounted on the column in front of you, that always stays in sight, works really nicely. But one thing that I'm not the biggest fan of with Volkswagen interiors, and Volkswagen is on the record to say that they are going to be changing this in future models, are these touch-sensitive buttons on the steering wheel here. They're easy to accidentally press when you don't mean to, when you're turning the steering wheel. This volume slider here and climate controls, it's just not as good as a volume dial. I mean, it's nice to have there in terms of having instead of nothing, I suppose, but this could be done better, and in future models it will be changed. So Volkswagen's aware of it. But otherwise, this infotainment system, I haven't dug through it and spent a lot of time with it in this review, to be honest with you, but it does appear to be pretty good overall. It's a good size. You've got all the features there. We'll know a little bit more about this in future reviews, I think. One thing that I'm not the biggest fan of in this vehicle, so yeah, I'll just turn the volume on. I'm going to turn that back off again. There you go. And it's pretty common with other vehicles as well, and that is the piano black materials on the inside here. They pick up dust, they pick up smudges all the time, and you'll notice it here in this center console area. It'll probably get scratched quite easily, but Volkswagen have kind of gone to the next level, and they've put them here on the grab handle, exactly where you grab the car, getting in and out, adjusting your windows and mirrors and that sort of thing. That smudges really quickly, and it's really noticeable as well. So you're going to be constantly wiping those down to keep them clean, which could get a little bit frustrating. But otherwise, this interior, it's good for practicality, it's good for storage. I love these seats, and the overall treatment I think looks really nice. So mostly it's a thumbs up. Now, in terms of overall length, this ID.4 is around 4.5 meters long, and it's a little bit shorter than other electric medium-sized SUVs. But here in the second row, I think there's a good amount of space on offer. So first things first, this is my driving position up front here. I had to turn off the passive entry assist thing that moves the seat around, but I'm around 1.8 meters tall, a bit under 6 foot in the old money, and in terms of space, I've got a good amount of legroom on offer here. There's a fair amount of tow room as well, and this seating position is really nice overall. There's a good amount of visibility, which I think is really important for family car buyers. I've got a good amount of window here. I can see forward. I'm not sort of ensconced in the back without any sort of visibility. And of course, I've got a big sunroof here as well to let the light in. So I think kids would be happy in the back here, and adults as well. These seats are comfortable. I do have air vents scooched down fairly low here in the center console, but it gives you good visibility once again forward, I think, and 2 USB points there and some climate control. So that's really nicely done. Got a drop down armrest with cup holders there, and there's also a ski hatch into the boot of this ID.4 Pro, which is a handy thing to have, maybe when you're going on your next ski trip or something like that. But in terms of width, in terms of comfort, in terms of family usage, I think this does hit the nail on the head. The Volkswagen ID.4 Pro is powered by a single electric motor at the rear, which makes 210 kilowatts and 545 newton meters. Now that is fed by a battery with 77 kilowatts of usable capacity, and it gives you a claimed driving range of 544 kilometers according to WLTP testing. Maximum charging speed for this vehicle is 175 kilowatts, which is a pretty good number, and it means you can go from 10 to 80% in a little over 20 minutes according to Volkswagen's claims. Also launching with the ID.4 Pro is the Volkswagen ID.5, which is the same car, but it's a little bit of a sportier coupe style SUV, and initially this will only be available in the GTX grade, which is something of a sporty choice in the range. This model gets 2 electric motors and all-wheel drive, and it has a claimed combined output of 250 kilowatts, but Volkswagen doesn't give us a combined torque output, unfortunately. Now this model has the same 77 kilowatt hour battery, but acceleration times drop from 6.7 seconds 0 to 100 down to 5.4 seconds. So this is a pretty quick car overall. But with that extra power, claimed range for this GTX model does drop down a little bit to 522 Ks. Now this Volkswagen ID.5 GTX is priced from $72,990 plus on roads. And along with that extra power and all-wheel drive, you do get an upgraded sound system, sporty seats on the inside, and 20-inch wheels on the outside. So for the time being, the Volkswagen ID.4 is coming to Australia as the Pro, which means it's rear-wheel drive and it's in this wagon format, while the ID.5 is the more swoopy sort of coupe SUV style, and that's the GTX, which has more power, more torque, all-wheel drive, and a bit more of a sporty bent in the way it's set up in the driving experience. Now, in the future, the ID.5 will come as a Pro, and the ID.4 will also come as a GTX, but for the time being, I'm behind the wheel of the ID.4 Pro, which I think is the pick of the range. This is a vehicle that is just under $60,000 plus on roads, and it's right amongst the competitive set in that regard. The new Tesla Model Y, which is coming soon, is around that mark. You've got so many options there, which is floating around the $55,000 to $65,000 mark, and a few that come in a little bit lower as well. So I do feel sorry for people who actually want to consider an electric medium-sized SUV. I mean, you've got so much choice, which is fantastic, but it's probably a bit bewildering as well. But let's cut to the chase here. Is this ID.4 worth consideration? In a word, yes, absolutely it is, and I'll tell you why. This vehicle, from the driving experience point of view, does feel really nicely dialed overall. Some of these electric vehicles can feel a bit heavy and burdensome at times, and they can get a little bit, I suppose, rough and jiggly around town. And this vehicle doesn't have much of that going on. I think the ID.4 Pro is the pick of the range, absolutely. Even though it doesn't have the all-wheel drive and the extra performance of the GTX, this is punchy enough, I think. It's nicely responsive, so the takeoff is good. It's nicely balanced in terms of ride quality, I think. And handling is actually pretty good as well for a circa 2-ton medium-sized electric SUV. It's definitely not a hot hatch. physics does catch up with you eventually when you start plugging this thing through corners, but I think for most people this will be plenty well dialed enough. Now, one thing worth noting here is the brake pedal feel. This is something that I think feels a bit different in this Volkswagen compared to most other electric and internal combustion cars. There's a fair amount of give in that brake pedal before it starts to really bite. So you've got a bit of regen, you work through there, but if you want to really mash the pedal, you have to push through a fair amount before it actually starts to brake meaningfully. So I think it's something you would get used to, but it just feels a bit spongy initially, especially compared to that initial bite that you get with other vehicles. In terms of regen braking, you don't have the same gamut of modes you can choose from in other vehicles. Instead, you've just got drive, which actually gives you a real coasting function in this car. It doesn't automatically get on the anchors as you roll off that throttle, which makes it feel noticeably quite different to other electric cars. So it feels a little bit more like a petrol car, I suppose, or an automatic petrol vehicle to drive. It just happens to be very quiet and electric. But you've also got another function here called B. So you stick that into B and then that dials up the regen a little bit more. So it's not a full one pedal driving experience, I think, but it's a little bit more what people would be used to with an EV. And it probably gives you a bit of extra driving range as well. Now, we haven't been able to do a full test of the driving range of this vehicle. We've got an 82 kilowatt hour battery, which is a really big battery, I have to say, for this size of car. And compared to the claimed consumption, we've been getting an indication that it's probably not too far off the money, but let's see what that's like on a more thorough long-term test, I think, which will happen soon at Drive. One thing that is refreshing is actually some equipment that this car is missing in comparison to others in the segment. We don't have driver monitoring here, so I don't have a little camera mounted somewhere on the steering column or the A-pillar looking at me and telling me when I'm not keeping my eyes on the road, even though most of the time I am. Yes, that's useful technology when it's implemented well, but in my experience, most of them are not implemented well, and not having it in this case kind of is a positive because we don't have as much beeping and bonging going on, which is a good thing. We've also got lane assistance here, we've got lane departure warning, lane keep assistance and that sort of thing. Most of the driving we have been doing on this initial review has been out in the countryside, and to be honest, that's not where this car's really going to be used more often than not. So I would say watch this space. I think we'll know a little bit more about this car in terms of its usability around town, how all of that driver assistance functionality works when we spend more time with it in the future, but initial indications are good. Now, a quick interruption if you don't mind. Please, if you haven't subscribed to our channel already, hit that bell notification button now, and if you have, that's awesome. Give us a thumbs up. We would really appreciate it. Now, your other option, of course, is the GTX model, and we've had a bit of time behind the wheel of that car, and the improvements in performance is definitely welcome. I think this car is no slouch, the Pro model, but the GTX adds definitely an extra element of performance there. It's not a melt your face kind of acceleration, but it's definitely really punchy, and it's enough to induce a few giggles from the passengers, I think, if that's what you're looking for. And even though it is all-wheel drive, there is a rear-wheel drive bias in that GTX, which sets it up pretty nicely from a dynamic point of view. It's quite nice to chuck around, but once again, this is a bit over 2 tons of SUV to thread through the corners, and that weight does catch up with you eventually. We don't have things like trick differentials and active sway bars to help sort of manage all of that weight. It's good to a point, I think. And no, it's not a GTI, and I think Volkswagen hasn't called it a GTI on purpose because it doesn't have that outright nimbleness and fun to drive factor, but it is pretty good, although the ride quality does take a little bit of a backward step in comparison to this Pro model. It's also worth pointing out that Volkswagen has gone to the effort of installing adaptive damping, what they call chassis control, and also a variable steering setup as standard kit for all Aussie delivered ID.4s, and it means this car has a bit more sophistication in the way it drives, and I think it does help. Now you do have 15 different damper settings available to you, especially through the customizable driver setting, which is nice to have. Now that sounds like a lot of settings to choose from, and it is, but the truth of the matter is there isn't a huge gamut of difference between the lowest and the highest settings. You can feel the difference, but it's not a huge stratospheric change overall. You can definitely feel a bit more firmness in the ride quality. You can feel a difference in the steering response, I think, in the highest settings, so you do get a little bit more of a dialed driving experience. But for my tastes, and I think for most people's tastes, to be honest with you, cranking that damper setting all the way down to the most comfortable is where this ID.4 Pro, and the GTX for that matter, feels at its best. But all in all, this ID.4 is an impressive vehicle. Even though it lands in such a competitive and crowded space of medium-sized electric SUVs, this does feel compelling. Not just because of the good levels of equipment here and the pricing that is right amongst the competitive set, but also just a good level of poise and refinement in the driving experience. And of course, a nicely set interior. So I've got to say, if you're in the market for an electric medium-sized SUV, this is definitely worth considering. Well, there's a lot to like about this Volkswagen ID.4, especially now that it's landed finally in Australia in this updated form with lots of standard kit and a sharp price that throws it right amongst the competition. Now that GTX model, it's nice, it's got all-wheel drive, a bit more performance and a bit more handling as well. But for me, this Pro is where it's at for the Volkswagen ID SUV range. It's got a bit more boot space in there, there's plenty of performance, the ride quality is nice, and you do get a nice sense of polish in that driving experience overall, which I think is important. Now, is it as good as all of those other models in the segment? There is so many to consider. I think this is right in the firing range to be one of the choices in the segment. Of course, there is a new Tesla Model Y coming soon, and there's going to be no shortage of updates and new models coming into this very competitive space as time goes on. But this is a really strong foot forward, I think, for Volkswagen, and it could be worth really considering for those who want an electric medium-sized SUV. Now, there is an updated Tesla Model Y coming to the Australian market soon, but if you want to see the current model in a review, check out this video here. It's definitely worth it, and as always, thank you for watching.